The war had been going on for 11 years. 11 years of fire and death and broken planets. 11 years of two great civilizations tearing each other apart across 6 star systems, while the rest of the galaxy watched from a safe distance. No one stepped in. No one wanted to. The Calvary Confederation and the Dreth Dominion were both enormous, both powerful, and both very, very angry at each other. Getting between them felt like stepping between 2 storms. So no one did, until the humans got the call. Commander Dale Hartley was eating a sandwich when the message came in. He was sitting in the small break room of the human diplomatic vessel Bright Accord, a ship that was built more for meetings than for fighting, with wide corridors and large conference rooms and a kitchen that made surprisingly good coffee. Dale was a quiet man in his late 40s, with short gray hair and the kind of face that had seen a lot of things and decided not to be surprised by any of them. He read the message twice, finished his sandwich, and then walked to the bridge. Lieutenant Kara Novak was already there. She was younger than Dale by about 15 years, sharp-eyed and calm, the kind of officer who noticed things before she was asked to notice them. She handed him a second copy of the message without a word. "Both sides asked for us?" Dale said. "Yes, sir," Kara said, independently. "The Calvary sent their request at noon. The Dreth sent theirs 6 hours later. The Galactic Neutral Council confirmed both this morning." Dale looked at the star map on the main screen. The contested region was marked in red, a wide stretch of space that had once been full of trade and life, and was now mostly debris and silence. "Specialist Briggs," he said. Owen Briggs looked up from his station. He was a young man with an easy manner and careful hands, the kind of person who always seemed relaxed, even when things were not relaxed at all. "Sir?" "History. Leadership profiles. The original Halveth dispute. Every ceasefire attempt in the last 11 years. I want to read it all before we dock." "That is a lot of reading," Owen said. "Then I will start now," Dale said, and walked back toward his cabin. Kara watched him go. She turned back to the star map and looked at the red zone for a long moment. 4.3 billion dead, the message had said. She had read that number 3 times and it still did not feel real. Numbers that large never did. They were too big for the mind to hold all at once. The Bright Accord changed course and moved toward the Galactic Neutral Council station. The station was enormous. It sat at the edge of the contested region like a great silver ring, neutral ground by treaty, the one place in this part of the galaxy where no weapons were allowed and no flags were flown. It was full of diplomats and observers from a dozen species, all of them watching the war from their windows, the way people watched a fire from across the street, close enough to feel the heat, but not close enough to get burned. When the Bright Accord docked, Counselor Verath was waiting at the gate. Verath was a Myreshi, tall and silver-skinned, with 4 long arms, and eyes that were a very pale shade of gold. He had been working in diplomacy for longer than Dale had been alive, and it showed, not in any weakness, but in a kind of deep, settled exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had tried very hard for a very long time, and was still trying. He greeted Dale with a formal bow. Dale shook his hand, which surprised Verath slightly. Humans always shook hands. Verath had never fully understood the gesture, but found it oddly reassuring. "Thank you for coming quickly," Verath said, as they walked. "What is the situation right now?" Dale asked. "Both fleets are holding position. They have agreed to a temporary pause in combat while talks are attempted. It will not hold long. 3 days, perhaps 4. Verath glanced sideways at Dale. "I must be honest with you, Commander. We have attempted 47 mediations in 11 years. 47. Each one has failed. The Council agreed to bring in your species because both sides requested it. But I want you to understand what you are walking into. These are not leaders who are eager for peace. They are leaders who are exhausted by war, but have no idea how to stop it without losing everything they think they are fighting for." "What do they think they are fighting for?" Dale asked. Verath was quiet for a moment. 11 years ago, it was about mining rights, about access to the Halveth corridors and the resources in that region. Now, he paused. Now I think they fight because they have been fighting. Because stopping feels like saying that everyone who died, died for nothing. Dale nodded slowly. He had read something like that in the files. He had read a lot of things in the files during the long approach to the station, sitting in his small cabin with a cup of coffee going cold beside him, reading until his eyes hurt. "Where are they now?" he asked. "Resting, separately. The Calvary delegation arrived yesterday. The Dreth arrived this morning. They have not been in the same room yet." Verat stopped walking and looked at Dale directly. "I want to be clear. Getting them in the same room at all will be difficult. Getting them to talk will be harder. Getting them to agree on anything—" "Has anyone tried asking them what they actually need?" Dale said. Verat blinked. "I'm sorry? Not what they want, not what they are demanding. What they need, the thing underneath the demands." Dale looked at him calmly. "Has anyone asked them that directly?" Verat opened his mouth and then closed it again. He thought about 47 mediations. He thought about the frameworks and the proposals and the carefully worded agreements that had all fallen apart. He tried to remember if anyone had ever asked that specific question in that specific way. He was not sure they had. "Set up the meeting for tomorrow morning. Same room, both sides, all senior people present. And have coffee ready. Good coffee, not the station kind." He walked on toward the human quarters. Verat stood in the corridor for a moment, watching him go. Then he turned and looked out through the wide observation window at the distant fleets hanging in the dark, still and quiet for now, loaded with enough firepower to end a world. He thought about a human commander asking for good coffee before the most important meeting in 11 years. He was not sure if that was very strange or very reassuring. He decided, after a moment, that it was probably both. The morning of the meeting, Dale woke up early. He sat at the small desk in his quarters for an hour before anyone else was awake, reading through his notes. He had written things down by hand, which Kara always found slightly strange in a man who had access to every digital tool available. But Dale said that writing by hand made him think more slowly, and thinking more slowly was sometimes the most useful thing a person could do. He read what he had written. He thought about the Calvary and the Dreth, and the 11 years between them. He thought about the 4.3 billion dead, which was a number he could not truly hold in his mind, but which sat behind every thought he had, like a weight. Then he got dressed, made himself coffee, and went to find Kara and Owen. They were already in the small briefing room, both of them quiet, both of them with that particular stillness that people get before something important. Kara had her notes organized in a neat stack. Owen had 2 extra pens in his pocket, which was the closest thing he had to a nervous habit. "How are we doing this?" Kara asked. "We go in and we listen," Dale said. "At first, mostly we just listen. Both sides are going to say things that are meant to make the other side angry. We do not react to those things. We stay calm. We stay present. We treat every person in that room like they are worth hearing." "And if they start threatening each other?" Owen asked. "Then we acknowledge the feeling behind the threat, without agreeing with the threat itself," Dale said. He picked up his coffee. "We are not there to tell them what to do. We are there to help them figure out what they actually want, which might be different from what they have been saying they want for 11 years. Owen wrote something in his notepad. Kara looked at Dale steadily. "And you think this will work?" Dale looked back at her. "I think it is worth trying. And I think we are maybe the only species in this part of the galaxy that actually believes that." They walked together to the conference chamber. The room was plain and gray and deliberately bare, the kind of neutral space the council used for high-level talks. There was a long table in the center with chairs on both sides. Water and small cups had been placed at intervals along the table. In the corner, as Dale had requested, there was a proper coffee setup, real ground beans, a proper machine, the kind that filled the room with a warm, quiet smell. The Calvary delegation arrived first. Admiral Koss entered the room like a man walking into a battle. He was large even for his species, broad across the chest and shoulders, with dark plated skin that caught the light in segments. His two officers followed close behind him. Koss looked at the table, looked at the chairs, and then looked at the three humans standing near the coffee corner with an expression that was hard to read. He sat down. His officer sat. No one spoke. The Dreth arrived 4 minutes later. High Commander Seval moved differently from Koss. Where he was heavy and deliberate, she was lean and precise, every movement measured. Her species had pale ridged faces and eyes that were a deep, steady amber. She saw Koss the moment she entered the room. Something passed across her face very quickly, and then was gone, replaced by a careful blankness. She sat across from him. Her two officers sat beside her. The silence in the room was the kind of silence that had weight. Dale let it sit for a moment. Then he poured himself a coffee, poured one for Kara without asking, and carried both cups to the table as he sat down at the head of it. Owen settled quietly at Dale's right side and opened his notepad. "Good morning," Dale said. "Thank you both for being here." Neither commander responded, but neither looked away either. "My name is Dale Hartley. This is Lieutenant Novak and Specialist Briggs. We are here at the request of both your governments, and we are grateful for that trust." He looked at Koss, then at Seval. "I have read all the files. I know the history. I know the shape of this war from the outside, the facts and the numbers and the timeline. What I do not know yet is the shape of it from the inside." He set down his coffee cup. "So I would like to start there, if that is acceptable. Not with demands or proposals, just with the truth of what this has been like. For both of you." Koss made a low sound in his chest. "We did not come here to share feelings with a human." "No," Dale agreed. "You came here because you are exhausted, and you need this to end, and you do not know how to end it without it costing you everything. That is why you are here." He said it without any edge, just as a plain fact. And I respect that. It took courage to sit down at this table. Both of you. Another silence, shorter this time. Seval spoke first. Her voice was low and measured. "The Calvari struck our shipyard at Drevos in the second month of the conflict. 6,000 workers, not soldiers, workers." Koss's jaw tightened. The Dreth had been funneling weapons through Drevos for 2 years prior. Our intelligence was clear. Your intelligence was wrong. Our intelligence... "Tell me about Drevos," Dale said to Seval, cutting across Koss, gently but firmly. "Not the military argument. Tell me what it meant." Seval looked at him. For a moment she seemed uncertain, as if she had prepared for an argument and had been handed something else instead. "Drevos was the first colony our people built in that system," she said slowly. "It was 300 years old. My grandmother's family came from Drevos." She paused. "When it was destroyed, it was not only a military loss. It was a wound that went into our people very deeply." The room was very still. Dale nodded. He did not say sorry. He did not say anything for a moment. He just let the words sit in the room and be real. Then he looked at Koss. "What did it feel like when the Dreth retaliated against Halvet Station?" Koss was quiet. His copper eyes moved slowly to the table in front of him. "We had children there," he said, after a moment. "Families of the garrison. We thought the station was far enough from the front line." His voice was flat and careful, the voice of a man who had learned to speak about pain without showing it. "We were wrong." Kara wrote something quietly in her notes. Owen did not write anything. He was just listening. Dale picked up his coffee. He let the silence be comfortable, which was a strange thing to do, and both alien commanders noticed it. Silences in negotiations were usually filled as fast as possible, stuffed with words and positions and demands. This human just sat in it, unhurried, as if there was nowhere else he needed to be. "We are going to stay in this room until we find a way forward," Dale said eventually, his voice easy and calm. "Not a perfect way, not a way that undoes what has been done, but a real way, one that both of you can take home and stand behind." He looked at both of them. I believe that is possible. I believe it because I read your files, and I saw something that your own negotiators may have missed. And what is that? Sival asked. That what your peoples actually need, Dale said, is not the same thing at all, and it never was. Both commanders stared at him. The coffee machine finished its cycle in the corner, filling the room with a quiet, ordinary sound. Dale did not explain himself right away. That was something both Admiral Koss and High Commander Seville noticed. When he said that what their peoples needed was not the same thing, and that it never had been, he did not immediately follow it with a plan, or a proposal, or a map. He refilled his coffee. He asked Owen to check that the water cups along the table were full. He sat back down and looked at both commanders with that calm, unhurried expression that had already begun to unsettle them in ways they could not quite name. Seville spoke first. You said our needs are not in conflict. Her voice was careful, the way a person's voice gets when they think they are about to be told something either very smart or very foolish. Explain that. I will, Dale said. But first I want to ask each of you something, and I want you to take your time before answering. There is no right answer. I just want the honest one. He looked at Koss. What does the Calvari Confederation need in order to survive and grow over the next 100 years? Not what you want from this war. What your people actually need, long-term, to be stable and strong. Koss looked at him with those steady copper eyes. For a moment, it seemed like he would not answer, like the question was too strange or too large to respond to in a room like this one. But something in the way Dale asked it, without pressure, without an angle, made him think. Access, Koss said finally. Our eastern colony worlds are growing. Our population is expanding faster than our current supply lines can support. We need reliable access to mineral deposits in the outer sectors. Without that, our expansion stalls. If our expansion stalls, our internal politics become unstable. He said it plainly, like a man reading from a document, and then seemed slightly surprised at himself for saying it at all. Dale nodded. He turned to Seville. And the Dreth Dominion? Seville was quiet for longer. She glanced once at her two officers, then back at Dale. Navigation rights, she said at last. The Halveth corridors are the fastest trade route between our core systems and our outer territories. Without clean passage through that region, our trade economy loses nearly 30% of its efficiency. We have been trying to secure those corridors for decades. That was the original dispute. Her voice was steady, but something in it had shifted, a kind of tiredness coming through that the careful blankness had been holding back. We have spent 11 years and 4 billion lives fighting over a trade route. The room was very quiet. And mineral access, Dale said, mostly to himself. He stood up and moved to the display panel on the wall. He pulled up the star map of the contested region, the Halveth corridors, the outer mining sectors, the 6 systems that had been burning for over a decade. He drew a simple line with his finger. The Calvari need resources from here. He drew another line. The Dreth need passage through here. He turned around and looked at both commanders. These two things occupy different spaces. They do not overlap. They never overlapped. Koss leaned forward slightly. The Halveth corridors run through contested mining territory. They run near it, Dale said, not through it. The navigational lanes your trade fleets use are 40,000 kilometers from the primary mining sites. The only reason they ever became connected in this conflict is because the original negotiators in Year 1 were arguing about who controlled the whole region, instead of asking who needed what part of it, and why. He looked at the map. Someone decided it was all one question, when it was actually 2 separate questions, with 2 separate answers. Seville was very still. Koss had both his large hands flat on the table. He was staring at the map. Are you telling me, Koss said slowly, that the Halveth mining rights and the Halveth navigation rights could have been negotiated as 2 separate agreements 11 years ago? I am telling you they still can be, Dale said. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. The earlier silences had been full of tension of old anger pressing against the walls of the room. It was the silence of two very tired, very intelligent people doing fast and uncomfortable mathematics in their heads. Kara was watching both commanders carefully. She had seen this before, not in alien diplomacy. She had never done alien diplomacy before, but in smaller rooms, in labor disputes, and community conflicts, and the long, difficult conversations that preceded real change. There was a moment when the other person stopped defending and started thinking, and you could always see it happen if you were paying attention. Both commanders were in that moment right now. Seval looked up from the map. "Even if the underlying needs are compatible," she said, "you are ignoring 11 years. You are ignoring what has been done. My people lost colonies. Yours lost settlements." She was speaking to Koss now, not to Dale, which was the first time she had addressed him directly. "How do you go home and tell your people that we are simply drawing two different lines on a map and calling it peace? How do I?" Koss did not answer immediately. Dale sat back down. He did not try to answer for Koss. He waited. "You tell them what you won," Koss said finally, his voice rough. "Not what you lost. What you actually secured for them going forward." He seemed uncomfortable with his own words, like he was working something out as he spoke it. "If our eastern expansion is now secured, if our supply lines are stable, if our colony worlds grow and prosper for the next 100 years. He stopped. He looked at the map again. "Then the people who died did not die for nothing. They died in a war that ended with us stronger than when we began." Seval was watching him. "And the Dreth," Dale said gently, turning to her, "will have secured the Halveth corridors for their trade fleets permanently. Not temporarily, not with conditions that expire. Permanently, written into a binding agreement that gives your economy exactly the stability it has been fighting for." He let that sit for a moment. "Your people lost colonies. They lost lives. They lost 11 years. But if this ends today, with the Dreth trade economy secured for generations, the people who died helped build that future." Seval's expression was hard to read. It was the expression of someone trying to hold two things at once, grief and the first thin edge of something that might eventually become hope, and finding that they were heavier together than either one alone. "It is not simple," she said. "No," Dale agreed. "It is not. Nothing about this is simple. But it is real, and real is what we are working with." Owen refilled the water cups quietly. Kara glanced at the clock on the wall. 2 hours and 40 minutes since the meeting began. Both commanders were still in their chairs. Neither had walked out. Neither had threatened the other in the last 40 minutes. In 11 years of failed mediations, that alone was something. Dale looked at the map on the wall for a moment, then back at the room. "Let us talk about what an agreement would actually look like," he said. "Not the politics of it, not the history, the practical shape of it. What would each side need to see in writing in order to feel that this was real?" He picked up his coffee. "Take your time. We have as long as we need." Koss looked at the map. Seval looked at Koss. And for the first time in 11 years, the two of them began to talk to each other. It started slowly. Koss spoke first. He said that any agreement would need to guarantee Calvari extraction rights in the eastern mining sectors without interference. Seval said that was acceptable, provided the navigation lanes through the Halveth corridors were marked as Dreth trade routes, and free from military stops or inspections. Koss said that military oversight of shipping was a security matter, not a territorial one. Seval said that was exactly what the Calvari had said 11 years ago, before they began stopping and boarding Dreth trade ships. The temperature in the room went up. Dale did not intervene. He let them argue. He and Kara and Owen sat at their end of the table and let the two commanders go back and forth. And after about 10 minutes of it, Kara leaned toward Dale and murmured, "Should we step in?" "Not yet," Dale said quietly. "They are getting heated. They are getting honest," Dale said. There is a difference. Kara watched the two commanders. Koss had his hands on the table and was speaking in the flat, blunt way of someone who was used to giving orders and was not used to explaining himself. Saval was responding in sharp, precise sentences that cut to the edge of things. Both of them were leaning forward now, and the careful distance they had maintained all morning had narrowed to almost nothing. Then Koss said something. He said that the boarding inspections had been necessary because Dreth's ships had been carrying weapons into contested space, and that if the Dreth wanted trust, they had to understand that trust was earned, not assumed. Saval went very still. "We carried weapons," she said, her voice low, "because your fleet had already destroyed 3 of our unarmed transports by the time we began arming our trade ships. We did not arm them to threaten you. We armed them because they kept dying." She paused. "We were afraid." The words sat in the room. Koss stared at her. His copper eyes were unreadable for a moment, and then something in them shifted, very slightly. Not much, but enough. "Admiral Koss, did you know that the Dreth had lost 3 unarmed transports before they began arming their ships?" Koss was quiet. "Our commanders at the time classified those as collateral losses during patrol operations. They were not flagged as unarmed." "They were unarmed," Saval said flatly. "I did not know that," Koss said. The words came out slowly, like they cost something. The room was very quiet. This was the thing Dale had been waiting for. Not a grand moment of forgiveness, or a sudden change of heart. Those things did not happen in real rooms between real people. What happened was smaller, and more important. A crack. A place where the story that each side had been telling itself for 11 years showed a gap. A detail that did not fit. A human moment underneath all the armor. He did not rush it. After a while, he said, "The inspections and the arming of trade ships were responses to each other. Each side thought it was defending itself. Each side was afraid of the other. And because neither side knew what the other was actually afraid of, the fear just kept growing." He looked at both of them. "That is how most wars work, in my experience. Not because one side is evil, because both sides are scared, and neither one knows how to say it." Saval looked at him for a long moment. "Humans say it?" "Humans try to," Dale said. "We are not always good at it. But we know what happens when we don't try, so we keep trying." Koss sat back in his chair. He looked older than he had at the start of the meeting. Not in a bad way, but in the way people look when they have put down something heavy they have been carrying for a long time. "The inspection protocol," he said slowly. "It could be replaced with a joint registry. Both sides submitting cargo manifests in advance to a neutral authority." Saval looked at him. "Define neutral authority." "The Council," Koss said. "They have the infrastructure. They have the staff." Saval thought about it. "With representatives from both sides on the review board." "Agreed," Koss said. Kara wrote that down. She wrote it quickly before either of them changed their minds, which was the right instinct. Dale watched the two commanders. Something was happening in the room that he had felt before in other negotiations. Not very often, but enough times to recognize it. It was the moment when the mechanics of an agreement started to build themselves, when the people in the room stopped arguing about whether to stop and started arguing about how. It was a subtle shift, easy to miss if you were not paying attention, but it changed everything. The small agreements started to stack. The joint registry was first. Then the definition of the navigation lanes, the exact coordinates, written into the agreement so that there would be no room later for one side to say they had meant something different. Then the mining sector boundaries, which took the longest, because the geology of the outer sectors was complicated, and both sides had legitimate claims that overlapped in 3 specific zones. For the 3 overlap zones, it was Owen who suggested something. He had been quiet for most of the morning. He sat at Dale's right hand, and took careful notes, and refilled water cups, and stayed very still the way he always did in important rooms, because Owen had learned early in his career that the most useful thing a junior officer could do in a tense negotiation was be invisible, until he was not. But when the overlap zone stalled the conversation for the second time, Owen looked up from his notepad and said, "Could those 3 zones be jointly administered? Both sides contribute to extraction operations. Both sides share the yield." Everyone at the table looked at him. He did not apologize for speaking. He just met their eyes calmly. Koss looked at Seval. Seval looked at Koss. "Joint administration would require a standing committee," Seval said. "Yes," Owen said. "That is how it usually works." "A committee with members from both sides," Koss said, slowly, like he was testing the shape of the idea in his mouth. "And from the council as a tiebreaker," Owen said. Another silence. Shorter. "That is workable," Koss said. "I will need to review the specifics," Seval said, "but the structure is acceptable in principle." Owen wrote it down. Kara looked at him sideways. He gave her a very small shrug, which was the closest he ever got to showing that he was pleased with himself. Dale was watching the clock. It was approaching the 4-hour mark. Both commanders were still in their chairs. The water cups were almost empty. The coffee machine in the corner had been used 6 times. The notes that Kara and Owen had been taking together covered 12 pages, single-sided, careful handwriting. Outside the observation glass, Counselor Verath had been standing in the corridor for most of the last 2 hours. He had brought a chair at some point and was sitting in it, watching through the glass with those pale gold eyes, not taking notes anymore, just watching. 2 of his staff stood beside him. None of them spoke. One of them had at some point quietly started crying. Not loudly, just the kind of quiet tears that come when something you stopped believing in starts to look possible again. Verath did not tell her to stop. Inside the room, Dale looked at the map on the wall, now covered in marks and lines and the shapes of what an agreement might look like. He looked at the 2 commanders, who were both leaning forward over the table, studying the same section of the map, with the focused attention of people working on a real problem instead of fighting over an old one. He picked up his coffee. It was cold. He drank it anyway. "Let us look at the ceasefire terms," he said. "The practical timeline. How both fleets stand down in a way that neither side feels exposed. That will require careful sequencing." "Yes," Dale said. "Tell me how you would want it to work." Koss told him. And Seval listened. And the 4th hour ticked toward the 5th. The ceasefire sequencing took 40 minutes. It was the most technically complicated part of the whole conversation. 2 enormous fleets had been sitting in contested space for days, loaded with weapons, crews wound tight, commanders on both sides who had spent years treating every movement by the other side as a potential attack. Standing those fleets down safely, in a way that neither side felt it was being exposed while the other held position, required a very specific order of events. Koss wanted the Dreth flanking elements to withdraw first. Seval wanted simultaneous withdrawal, both sides pulling back at the same moment by exact equal distances. Koss said that simultaneous withdrawal required a level of trust that had not been established yet. Seval said that asking the Dreth to move first assumed a level of bad faith that she was not willing to accept. They went back and forth on it for 15 minutes, and the room got tense again, the same low tension that had been there at the start of the morning, and Kara watched Dale to see what he would do. Dale let them go for a while. Then he said, "What if a third party gives the signal? Neither side moves until the council confirms, in real time, that both sides are moving together. Not one before the other. Simultaneous, with council observers on both fleets watching and reporting." Both commanders looked at him. "Council observers on our fleet?" Koss said slowly. "Temporarily," Dale said, "for the duration of the withdrawal sequence only. Once both fleets are at the agreed positions, the observers leave. It is not a permanent arrangement. It is a mechanism for making the simultaneous withdrawal real instead of just promised." Koss thought about it. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were working. "It would need to be equal," Seval said. "The same number of observers on both fleets, the same authority, the same access." "Completely equal," Dale agreed. "Shorter, each time now." which Kara had noticed and written down at the bottom of her notes because it felt important to record. Acceptable, Koss said. Acceptable, Seville said. Owen wrote it down. The next 20 minutes were about the formal language of the document itself, the specific words that would be used to describe the agreement in both the Calvari and Dreth official records. This was not a small thing. Words in formal agreements carried weight for generations. Both commanders were careful and precise about the language, and Dale let them be, stepping in only twice. Once when a phrase Koss proposed carried a connotation in the Dreth language that implied victory over a defeated enemy, and once when Seville's suggested wording for the mining rights clause was technically accurate but implied a Dreth right of oversight that had not been agreed to. Both times he pointed it out quietly, without accusation, just as a practical matter of making sure the document said what both sides actually meant. Both times the commanders accepted the correction and adjusted the language. By the time the document was in a form both sides were ready to put their names to, it was 4 hours and 49 minutes since the meeting had started. Dale read through the full document one time. He did it carefully, the same way he had read his notes that morning, slowly and thoroughly, not rushing. Kara read it at the same time on her own screen, checking the technical details. Owen cross-referenced the map markings against the written coordinates to make sure everything matched. "It is clean," Kara said. "The coordinates on Section 4 need one adjustment," Owen said. He pointed it out. It was corrected. The document was clean. Dale set it on the table in front of Admiral Koss. Koss looked at it for a long moment. He looked at the pages, the lines of text, the map sections with their new boundaries. He looked at the Joint Committee clauses, the navigation lane definitions, the inspection registry structure. He looked at the ceasefire sequencing protocol with its council observers and its simultaneous withdrawal mechanism. He picked up the pen. He signed it. Dale carried the document across the table to High Commander Seville. Seville looked at it for a shorter time than Koss had. She had been in the room for almost 5 hours, and she was tired in a way that went all the way down. The kind of tired that came from putting down something you had been carrying so long you had forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. She picked up her own pen. She held it over the document for just a moment, and then she signed it. 4 hours and 58 minutes. The document sat on the table with 2 signatures on it, and the quiet of the room pressing in from all sides. Dale put his hand out to Koss. Koss looked at the hand for a moment, the old human gesture that Mareshi diplomats had never fully understood, and then he took it, his large, dark hand around Dale's, and they shook once, firmly. Dale shook Seville's hand next. She gripped it with the focused precision of her species, a short, deliberate clasp. Then, because neither of them had planned it, and because no one had suggested it, Koss and Seville looked at each other across the table. Koss extended his hand. Seville looked at it. Then she took it. They shook hands, the two of them, for the first time in 11 years of war. Kara looked down at her notes. Her handwriting had gotten slightly less neat in the last half hour, which happened when she was tired. And she was very tired. But the notes were complete and clear, and covered 14 pages. She clicked her pen and set it down. Owen closed his notepad. He had the expression he always got when a thing he had worked on came out right. Not triumphant, just quietly satisfied, like a carpenter looking at a joint that had come together clean. The door opened. Counselor Vereth entered the room. He had clearly been crying at some point in the last hour, though he had done his best to make his face composed before walking in. He stood at the edge of the room and looked at the document on the table, at the 2 signatures side by side, and something in his silver face went through several things at once that were too complex to name. He looked at Dale. 47 mediations, he said. His voice was not entirely steady. In 11 years, by the best diplomatic minds we had. I know, Dale said. How, Vereth said, and the word was not quite a question, just a word put out into the room. Dale thought about it for a moment. He thought about what to say, how to explain something that felt to him like it should have been simple, even though he knew it was not simple, even though he knew that simple and easy were not the same thing. "You were trying to make them stop fighting," he said. "We tried to make them stop wanting to fight. Those are different problems, and the second one is harder, but it is the only one that actually works." He picked up his cold coffee. "You have to find out what people are scared of. You have to sit inside the fear with them and not try to argue them out of it. Just stay there until they trust you enough to tell you what they actually need. And then most of the time, if you listen carefully enough, what they need is not as impossible as what they were asking for." Vareth was quiet for a long moment. "Your species," he said finally, "has had a great deal of practice with this." "Too much," Dale said, "but yes." He looked at Kos and Seval, who had both sat back down, not because the meeting was continuing, but simply because neither of them seemed quite ready to stand up yet. They were not talking, they were just sitting, two old enemies in the same room, in the quiet that came after something large had ended. Outside the station windows, the two great fleets were still. They would begin their withdrawal in a few hours, both of them moving at the same moment, council observers on every bridge, the long, slow process of pulling back from 11 years of war. It would not be simple after today. There would be hard conversations, and difficult adjustments, and moments when the agreement would seem fragile. That was always true. Agreements were not endings. They were beginnings, and beginnings were hard. But today, in this gray room with a good coffee machine and 14 pages of careful notes, something had ended, and something else had begun. Kara gathered her papers. Owen slipped his notepad into his jacket. Dale set down his empty cup. The three of them walked out of the conference room together, back through the wide corridors of the station. Just three ordinary people in a hallway, not looking like anything in particular. Behind them, the document with two signatures sat on the table. Outside, the fleets waited to go home.